Assalamualaikum and good day. I am Mohammad Aslan Barodi from ICT 1. I am here to discuss to you the sample procedure and the sample population. The total of the all objects, elements, persons, and characteristics under consideration. It is understood that this population possesses common characteristics about which the research to explore. There are two types of population: target population and accessible population. The actual population is the target population. For example, all senior high school students enrolled in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics STEM in the double of the division of Cagayan de Oro City, while the accessible population is the portion of the population in which the researcher has reasonable access. For example, all senior high school enrolled STEM Strand Marayon Science High School 10. Next, sample. Sample representative is a sample representative is identified. Sampling pertains to systematic process of selecting the group to be analyzed in the research study. The goal is to get information from a group that represent the target population. Once a good sample is obtained, the generalizability and applicability of findings increases. Next, for example, the representative subset of the population refer to the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics strand in a school. For example, all the 240 senior high school students enrolled in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics STEM strand in a school. For example, constitute the population. 60 of those students constitute the sample. A good sample should have characteristics of the represented population. Characteristics that are within the scope of the study with fair accuracy. Generally, the larger the sample, the more reliable the sample be. But still, it will depend on the scope and the limitation and research design of the study. Next, heuristics. This approach refers to the rule of the thumb for the sample size. Sample sizes for different research designs are the following: research design and the number of subject participants. Descriptive research, 10% to 20% may be required. Comparative research, 15 subjects or groups. It means that descriptive research have the total number of 20% and 20% may be required. Comparative research, 15 subjects or groups. Next, also suggested different sample size for each quantitative research design. Research design. Survey. Number of subject participants 800. Correlational number of the subjects and participants 100 to 200. Ex post facto number of subjects participants 30 plus. Research design experimental. Number of subject participants, 30 or more. Next, literature review. Another approach is by reading similar or related literature and studies to your current research study. Since you are done writing your review or related literature and studies, you might want to recall how these studies determine sample sizes. Using the approach increases the validity of your sampling procedure. The formulas. Formulas are also being established for the computation of an acceptable sample size. The common formula is solvent formula. Solvent formula. N equals to N over 1 plus NE squared, where N is the sample size, N capital is the population size, E is the desired margin of error. For example, N the sample size equals to 600 divided by 1 plus 600 times 0.05 squared equals 600 divided by 1 plus 600 times 0.0025. Next is 600 divided by 1 plus 1.5. The equal is 240. Next, power analysis. This approach is founded on the principle of power analysis. There are two principles you need to consider if you are going to use this approach. These are statistical power and effect size. The probability of rejecting the null hypothesis is called statistical power. It suggests that indeed there is a relationship between the independent and dependent variables of the research study. The ideal statistical power of a research study is 80%. With that statistical power, it will be used to identify the sufficient sample size for measuring the effect size of a certain treatment. For example, your research study reveals that there is a difference in the pre-test and post-test scores of the student in a given anxiety test after implementing a psychosocial intervention. With the effect size, you will have an idea of how small or large the difference is. Next, probability sampling in quantitative research. Sample random sampling or SRS. It is a way of choosing individuals in which all members of the accessible population are given an equal chance to be selected. There are various ways of obtaining samples through simple random sampling. There are fishbowl technique, roulette wheel, or use the table of random numbers. This technique is also readily available online. Next, stratified random sampling, SRS. The same with simple random sampling, stratified random sampling also gives an equal chance to all members of the population to be chosen. However, The population is first divided into strata or groups. Before selecting the samples are chosen from these subgroups and not directly from the entire population. This procedure is best used when the variables of the study are also grouped into classes such as gender and you can simply follow the steps from this given example. A population of 600 junior high school students includes 180 grade 7, 160 grade 8, 150 grade 9, and 110 grade 10. If the computed sample size is 240, the following proportionate sampling will be as follows. The number of members per subgroup is divided by the total accessible sample size. The percentage result of members per subgroup will be multiplied from the computed total sample size. After obtaining the sample size per strata, then simple random sampling will be done for the selection of the samples from each group. This is the table. 180 divided by 600 students is equal to 0.30 times 240 equals 70 grade 7 students. 160 divided by 600 is equals to 0.27 times 240 equals 65 grade 8 students. 150 150 over 600 is equals 0.25 times 240 is equals to 60 grade 9 students. And lastly, 110 over 600 equals 0.18 times 240 is equals to 48 grade 10 students. Next, cluster sampling. This procedure is usually in large-scale studies. Geographical spread out of the population is a challenge, and gathering information will be very time-consuming. Similar to stratified random sampling, cluster sampling also involves grouping of the population according to subgroups or clusters. It is a method where multiple clusters of people from the chosen population will be created by the researcher in order to have homogeneous characteristics. For example, a researcher would like to interview of all public senior high school students across Mindanao, as a researcher cluster will be selected on satisfy the plan size. In the given example, the first cluster can be region. The second cluster can be by division, and the third cluster can be by district. Next, here of doing cluster sampling is illustrated on the figure on right side. Next, systematic sampling. This procedure is as simple as selecting samples. Every example, every second fifth of the chosen population until arriving at a desired total number of sample size. Therefore, the selection is based on predetermined interval. Dividing the population size by the sample size, the interval will be obtained. For example, from a total population of 75, you have 25 samples. Using systematic sampling, you will be decided to select every third person on the list of individuals. Thanks for listening. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.